Hello, everyone. It's Laurie and Jennie from AstroPath, which is a combination of astrolore and hidden path astrology. So you can find Jennie at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at astrolore.org. And we do this work together. And today our conversation is about Cancer season. So this is the period of time while the sun is moving through Cancer. Because Mercury and Venus stay so close, we call these seasons because there's always sort of this movement through that sign during this period of time. Now, the thing that's special about Cancer season is that it begins with the solstice. Do you want to talk about the solstice, Jennie?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the solstice is it's the beginning of summer in the northern hemisphere, and it's the beginning of winter in the southern hemisphere. So it really marks one of our two major seasonal shifts, one to the summer, one to the winter. So that, I mean, that's in a nutshell all it is. It's it's when the sun has reached its northernmost point relative to the globe. So that's why here in the north we're experiencing more summer, people experiencing winter in the south. So that's as simple as it is, really.
Yeah. And, you know, the only other thing I want to say about that is that, you know, to really understand that Western astrology is based on the seasons. When you get into other kinds of astrology, Vedic astrology, it's based on the constellations. Western astrology is not based on the constellations. The names of the seasons connect with constellations, but that's not what we base. The signs are not based on the constellations. They're based on the seasons. So with that being said, we are going to basically cover 5 different themes that we think are important to think about as we're going through Cancer season. And the first one, I'm going to just jump in real quick, and we're attempting to make this video less than 2.5 hours. So we're going to start out. The first thing we want to just mention is that the new moon, the first phase of the moon, as far as the quarter phases, happens on June 28th, the new moon at 7 degrees of Cancer. So that's, you know, you want to look in your personal chart at where Cancer is, and that's where you're planting your seed. The full moon happens on July 13th, and that is in Capricorn. And you have some really interesting thoughts about that, that new moon to full moon.
Yeah.
Could you say a bit about that?
Well, in a lot of ways, Cancer, excuse me, my voice is a little rough today. A lot of ways, Cancer is how we nurture ourselves. So this is going to be a golden opportunity for you to really look within and find those areas that are vulnerable and sensitive and take care of those areas, because they really represent where we haven't really fully been able to grow up and really kind of mature. So this particular season, you get to think about what Cancer is for a few days. And then at the new moon on the 28th, you're going to plant the seed for what part of yourself you really need to bring loving sensitivity to in the pursuit of kindness and maturing of those. We all have like a, you know, these childlike parts of ourselves that need to be loved and cherished, and we have to do the job of maturing, of parenting ourselves. I don't care if you're 10 years old or 75 years old, you're still doing this work. So and then at the full moon, you're going to get a nice little view into, well, what kind of maturing have you been able to do in that time? And we will talk more about this when we make our new moon videos. So that's just the quick theme.
Yeah, that's the quick theme. And yeah, be sure to come back and watch our new moon video, because I think this is a really going to be an interesting one to think about and work with in your own life. So the next theme, moving right along, is one that Jennie's going to talk about. Yes.
The next theme is that we have both of the planets that hug the sun. So that's Mercury and Venus, that neither of them move that far away from the sun. So they really kind of work together, even if they're all in different signs. And in this case, both Mercury and Venus during this month are going to trine Saturn. So that's going to be an opportunity for stabilization of both planets. So that's communication, Mercury, relationships and values, Venus. In the simplest of terms, they're both going to have this great opportunity for stabilization. And then they both square Neptune.
Mm.
So that kind of brings in this whole kind of woo-woo, like really imaginative, sort of transcendent, artistic sorts of things, and just the ability to think, big and beyond the realms of boundaries, and so you kind of have this opportunity for like, they get stable, and then you get to dream big, you get to allow yourself to really have this container for these really imaginative things. So
It's
that's what's
yeah,
cool.
it's really interesting to think about that because the trine, when Saturn trines each of these planets, yeah, it is like you said, it's the opportunity to stabilize, to put some structure under it. And then right after that, in both cases, Neptune squaring it.
Mhm.
The best way to use that square is, as you said, to use the stabilization that's been developed by Saturn to allow us to dream and use our imagination. And
Mhm.
I think that
Yeah.
really helps because the square, when these planets square Neptune, it could bring us into a lot of confusion
Mhm.
and, like just lack of
Yeah.
clarity. But because we've had that stabilization, I think it really allows a better use of it, especially if
Yeah.
we're aware of it.
Yeah. And just, I mean, it's kind of like saying, I want to meditate. That would be the Neptune part. But then the Saturn part allows you to go, well, when can I do it? Do I want to make a little altar or room where I can do it? And you
Right,
kind of set aside the time and the
right.
space. So this is a simple example. You set aside the time and then you do the thing.
That's an
So
awesome example.
yeah,
That's
still
an
up to you.
awesome
So
example. Yeah, Saturn comes along and you set up your altar. And
Mhm.
then when Neptune comes, you're ready to do the work that the square insists on.
Yeah.
And that would be kind of Mercury. And then with Venus, you can think, well, I want to, do something artistic. I want to paint a picture.
Yeah.
So Saturn comes along and you go and you get your supplies prepared. And
Yeah.
then when Neptune does the square, you're ready to put the color on the canvas.
Yeah.
Well,
That's great.
I
Yeah.
love that. So just as far as the dates for those, to give you the dates on those, let me see. First, Mercury. Ooh, do you have those quicker to
Yeah.
look at than I do?
July 2nd, Mercury does it at the same time. So
Oh,
you have
yes.
the Mercury to Saturn, Mercury to Neptune the same day. And
Right.
then Venus, let's see, the trine is on July 13th, the trine to Saturn. And the very next day, you have the square to Neptune.
Okay.
So July 2nd, July 13th, 14th for those
Right.
two,
Right.
those two opportunities, really.
Yeah, I
Cool.
love having those working together. It just makes it so, yeah, it gives you the ability to take the action necessary.
Yeah.
I think
Awesome.
that's great. Okay,
Cool.
so the next thing we want to talk about are the aspects to Pluto.
Hmm.
And for that, let me see, on July 1st, Mars squares Pluto.
Yep. Hmm.
Whenever these personal planets are in a hard aspect to Pluto, it's really the way I think about it is there's something big and dark and ugly in the culture that we're having to face and deal with and think about.
For sure. Yeah.
So on July 1st, with the square to Pluto, that could be a very volatile day, a very volatile time. And later in the month, on July 18th and 19th, both Mercury and the Sun oppose Pluto.
Yeah.
So that's like an awareness. Whatever
Mhm.
action is taken on July 1st, whatever action you
Yeah.
see, the meaning of it
Mhm.
becomes clear with that awareness in the opposition on the 18th and 19th.
Yeah. So, as far as timing, the July 1st one of the Mars square Pluto, that's kind of like a third of the way through our season here. And I mean, that could be with the square, that can be a real power struggle. That can
Mhm.
be, this, yeah, just, I mean, a power struggle is probably the quickest
Right.
kind of keyword to think about with Mars being action it wants to take, and it's in Aries. So it's
Right.
fierce and
Yes.
volatile, and then squaring Pluto and
Yes.
Capricorn. I mean, Pluto and Capricorn has been moving through Capricorn for years, and it's slow and it's coming to the end. And so it's this against this big, slow moving, solid mountain, like wall of mountain, you know?
Right. Right.
And that's the first part. And then at the end of the month is when we're going to encounter them. I think maybe a little bit more personal of the struggle at the end of the month, like the Mercury Sun opposed Pluto at the end of the month. So it's kind of like these two, you know, third of the way through the month and then at the end.
So yeah, look, you know, in your own life, when you're thinking about this in your own life, if there's something that's really got you worked up around that July 1st, 2nd time frame, you know, you talked about it as a power struggle, which is usually, you know, what you could expect. However, with Mars in Aries, it could be an out and out battle.
Yeah.
You know, it could be more than just a struggle. It could be a real battle there. You know, whatever is going on in your own life that might relate to that at the end of the month or toward the end of the season, the 18th and the 19th, there's just an ability to articulate it or kind of wrap it up in an understandable storyline.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how it's a square earlier, so the struggle, and then at the end is the opposition. And the opposition, despite oppositions being a challenging aspect, it's also an awareness thing. And it is incompatible signs. I mean, you're looking at water, you know, Mercury and Sun and water signs opposed Pluto and Earth. So we are in a yin compatible sign. So they're not at odds with each other in quite the same way. It's more like a polarity where you've got to honor both ends. And figure out how they work together. So it's a little more like that. So I think you're right about the awareness, the clarity coming in.
Yeah. And it also, you know, the other thing to think about is it's in those same signs, in that same opposition that the new and full moon were. Yeah. So, you know, there's a mirroring here of what, you know, this story is also connected to the moon cycle.
Yeah, and those themes are valid. You know, the Cancer themes of loving kindness, protectiveness, vulnerability, nurturing yourself, nourishing yourself. And then Capricorn is like find integrity, mature, you know, master the thing you're working on, which takes hard work and effort and skill. So these are the themes we're looking at, you know, the like taking care of yourself enough so that you can grow up and stand tall in the thing you're here to do, right?
Right. So. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Okay. That was the third of our themes. The fourth one are the ingresses, and I'm going to turn that over to you to talk about.
Yeah. So the ingresses, I mean, obviously we have the sun moving into Cancer, kicking off our video.
Okay. What's ingress mean for those of us who don't know?
Entrance into, or, you know, going into, you could just say moving into, sun moving into Cancer. Ingress is a nerdy word for ingressing into. But anyway, so that's that. We have, I mean, there's just a few shifts up. You know, all of the planets, the personal planets, that's Venus, Mars, and Mercury, are going out of signs that they like to be in and into signs they're not as fond of. So Venus is going from its lovely home sign of Taurus, it's moving into Gemini. So it's having to get much more agitated and chatty and social, which isn't a bad thing. You have, that's on June 22nd. On July 25th, you have Mars going into Taurus. Mars does not like Taurus. Mars gets angry and stubborn and trapped in Taurus. That's its go-to. It can be incredibly effective.
And he's been in Aries.
Yeah.
He's been in Aries. So it's sort of like he hits a wall there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like a stone wall. I think about Mars going into Taurus as a little bit like it's driving along and it gets stuck in the mud and it starts to rev the engine. And instead of revving the engine, the better thing to do is to get out, get help. Taurus is talking more about relationship, you know, and draw people in. So it's not that it's terrible necessarily. It's just that you need to find another way. You can't just Mars it. You're gonna have to get help. You're gonna have to cool down, you know, like get more grounded. I mean,
I think one of the hardest things about it is the fact that it's just come from Aries, where it's been so strong, and then it gets stuck in the mud. I love how you said that. That's great.
But there's always options. That's the thing to remember. That same day, Mercury moves out of its happy place of Gemini and into Cancer. So now it's having to kind of wallow around in this, watery place, and when, slow down and take more care. And it doesn't want to, because it just wants to deliver information. It's like, oh, I don't want to get stuck with this. I don't want to have to nurture people through my information. I just want to give it. So, there's that too. It has to kind of do that.
Yeah.
And then Venus moves again. So Venus moving very quickly, moves into Cancer on the 17th. So now Venus is a little happier in Cancer. It lines up a little bit more with its sensibilities. And then the final two pieces are Mercury moves into Leo at the very end of the month, quickly followed by the Sun on the 22nd, and that will be a new video for us. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really worth noting that both Mercury and Venus, they each change signs twice in this period.
Yeah.
So that tells us that both Mercury and Venus are moving very quickly. And when planets are moving quickly, our lives are moving quickly. So on that level of communication, on the level of our values, things are just moving along very quickly. I guess I just wanted to say on top of that I think Mercury is pretty happy in Leo. And yeah, Mercury enters Leo when? On the 19th, is that right? Yes, the 19th.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I think Mercury is pretty happy in Leo. It can express itself very dramatically. It's been in Cancer where, like you said, in Cancer, it has to talk about its emotions.
Yeah.
And Mercury would rather not, because Mercury is not an emotional planet. So it gets through that quickly and goes into Leo. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, the next thing I want to talk about is Jupiter. And it seems kind of strange to be talking about Jupiter right now, because Jupiter does not actually turn retrograde until July 28th. But right now, I just feel like it's so important, because right now, Jupiter is standing still at 8 degrees of Aries. So it's moving so slowly. It's just standing there. And, anyone who has planets between 28 Pisces and between 8 degrees Aries backwards to 28 Pisces is going to get this Jupiter. Jupiter is going to be expanding that area of our lives. So if you've got planets in there, it's going to be a really significant place. So I just want to kind of highlight where that is in your chart.
Yeah.
Was there more that you wanted to say about that?
The only thing I'll add about Jupiter is it does make aspects to the all-important Sun. Actually, the same day as the new moon on June 28th, the Sun actually does square Jupiter. And Mercury does later too. So Mercury does on July 9th. So this just to say that, Jupiter is a playa in this month. It's not just that you're talking about Jupiter without any context. It's going to square both of those things. So it's something that's got our attention. It's something that is expanding rapidly with intensity, fire. So
and Jupiter not very long ago, within the last few weeks, conjuncted with Mars while he was right in there in his home sign. And so there's a lot of this expansion of direct action.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to look at that area of your chart, because it's really going to be an important piece going forward.
Yeah, I mean, just on a personal note, I have this is hitting me quite prominently, and it's shed a lot of light on. Oh, okay, I've been feeling some intensity around that. So it definitely, it's a thing. I mean, because it's staying in the same place for so long, it's really it's kind of like having a little bit of a cut, and then you keep irritating the cut. And it's not, so there's a little bit of a grindy sandpapery feel perhaps with that, because it's in Aries, it's hot. And depending how you're wired, if you're a person with a lot of heat, it might be more comfortable. For those of you not, it might feel like a real irritant. So tuning in is just going to really help you. Schedule a consultation with one of us if you want to find out more about how that's really playing out in your chart.
And how that will be as it goes retrograde and does its little thing. I think one of the reasons that I was really drawn to thinking about this month is also because I just can feel it. I can feel it. And when a planet, when a planet's moving really quickly, it doesn't impact us the same way as when it slows down. It's like the slower a planet is in motion, the more impact it's going to have.
Yeah.
So when a planet is standing still, it has its impact. And in Aries, it's an expansion of heat. Like you said, it's an expansion of heat. It's an expansion of assertiveness, drive, action, anger, all those things that Aries brings to the table. Okay.
Yeah, you were reminding me of just a little bit of an analogy of it's almost like it's the teacher that you didn't like at school, but they taught you a lot and you were like, and they stood over you until you got certain lessons and you may not have liked it, but by God, you remember it in your 40s. So that's what it made me think of. So
that's so funny. That's great. That's awesome. I think of, I think my cat is a Jupiter station thing.
It is a lion.
But this is a little lion and it is a little teacher. It's a whole 3 pounds of teaching. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So are we ready to open up the individual impact charts?
Yeah, so next up, folks, we're going to go by rising sign by sign. So here we go. And we will put timestamps up so you can skip to yours.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to start here. Those of you, and I will kind of explain what I've got marked on these. Let me see here. First of all, we are looking at the sun. So if you have Aries rising, Cancer season basically is happening here in your 4th house. So this is bringing if you have Aries rising, Cancer is held in your 4th house. You have this natural understanding of nurturing and protection around family and home. And this is where the focus, a great deal of your focus this month will be in that area.
Yeah.
So, you can think about the pathway. The new moon will be along this path. The connection of the planets when they are, I marked these things, which now I would have marked them differently if I was starting now after we've had this part of the conversation. But this little dot here represents Pluto. And this little line here represents what Jupiter is going to be doing in its retrograde. Yeah. So what I want you to think about first is that the focus is mostly here in your 4th house, home and family.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this can be, sorry, go ahead. Do you want me
No, the only other thing I was going to say was that the expansion of heat is here in your 1st house. It is around your personality and how you directly express your personality.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to add that the Cancer focus here, as you said, is family, but this could be your physical home. This could be something more esoteric, like your lineage, some way that it's time to nurture and take care of that part of your life. It might be that you're learning more about your own vulnerability through your family lineage. Could be something like that. And then at the end of the month, we're going to run into a little bit of a thing with Pluto, right? So at the end of the month, you're going to have Sun opposing that Pluto, which is going to bring a bit more of like a power struggle, perhaps a head off between your family life and your work life.
Right.
Something like that.
And because the square to Mars was here, so there's sort of a stress here between home and career and your personality, how it manages both.
Yeah. And so your job is going to be to take action on your self-development so that you can handle this stress, so that you can work with both ends of your home life and your work life, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, one of the ways, because of that's going to basically be a T-square going on, is, looking to finding diplomatic solutions through other people.
Yeah.
going to the opposition there. Is that clear?
I don't know. We'll have to ask our. I hope. I mean, it's a lot of different little topics, but I think it is. I think we've hit a lot of the things on the. We've talked about each piece of it, I think. So.
Okay. Then we will move to those of you who have Taurus rising. Now here we're looking at, let me make those go away.
Nice.
We're looking at Cancer season being here in your third house. So what we're working with here is finding ways to communicate. You know, your focus this month is going to be on nurturing and protecting through your communication, possibly within the context of your day-to-day people in your lives, the people that you see at the grocery store, the post office, your neighbors. So that's going to be the area of most focus for the month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's a really good time for you to really understand how a lot of your emotional stuff when you're a Taurus rising actually does come through your communication, and that there might be times that you don't quite realize how much your emotional content fuels things in your conversations. And that's it's just a good time to become aware of that, because you know, this is this more kind of possibly this more hurt, vulnerable place for you that's in charge of all your communication. So it's a good place to kind of tune in and be like, well, you know, what kinds of conflicts do I have, and how does my communication impact that?
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting. And so the opposition, and this dot here represents Pluto, because later in the month we've got that Pluto and Mercury that Sun and Mercury opposing Pluto. And this is also the line where the full moon is going to fall. So there's going to be a certain amount of stress in between those two houses. So between your nurturing communication and this sort of serious worldview you have. So there's some conflict in that is going to be more understandable and clear to you at the end of the month, but it's something that's going to be kind of building through the month, I think. And the Jupiter in this 12th house, an expansion of probably learning to understand how these things are connected to your unconscious. You know, how's your worldview and how you communicate? How is that coming from something you're not even conscious of? And how can you become conscious there?
Yeah, you got it. I mean, I think, I mean, we all have this unconscious material, and we spend our lives kind of bring some of it to conscious light. And here with that Aries in the 12th house, there's a lot of it's very personal for you with this setup. Like, you really have to dig in to understand more of what those unconscious things are. But it's a profound source of wisdom. Like, as you do that work, you open your mind. You open your mind to learning from teachers and possibly becoming a teacher yourself through doing that work. And there's a lot of depth here. And it's worthwhile, but it's intense, because you have to resolve some of that emotional content that you may not really want to very easily, but to really seize the opportunity.
Right.
So yeah,
that's really it's just so interesting to think about how that may play out. And you know, so Jupiter is here really heating up that importance of doing that deep inner work. And yes, that deep inner work is going to change your worldview and how you communicate.
Yeah. And you're going to notice, because that third house is that those petty little things that are going to annoy, you know, like kind of get in there. Right. And that's what to tune into, because that's actually where you're available to do that kind of work. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, we are going to go to Gemini rising. So here with Gemini rising, let me just circle the Cancer sun down here. So it's in your second house. Cancer season brings the heat and the warmth of the sun into your second house, warming up and bringing light to your worldview, how you use resources, money, those kind of things. Just to let you know, this red dot represents Pluto, and this blue arrows represents Jupiter. This may not have been the most effective way to set it up, but it's how we've got it.
Oh,
so
great.
Basically, what I want you to think about is the line between here and here. What does that line there represent, Jenny?
My goodness. This is also the place where the new moon and full moon are occurring. So we have kind of like a double score of this area of your life is being activated a lot this month. And I think the key word to me, if I had to just pick one thing, there's a lot of stuff about self-love for you with the Gemini rising. It's very, very important for you to kind of fill your cup with the self-love and really just recognize and nurture and protect like your self-worth. That's at the core of what you're going to be doing this month. Like it's an opportunity for that. And it can affect your money. I mean, I also think money is just ultimately an extension of how we value ourselves. Right. It's going to pop up in different ways for different people, but that's what I'm thinking of. And where's the stress coming from, Laurie?
Well, there's a few different things to think about here. Well, there's a million things to think about. But during the course of the month, we talked about the Sun and Mercury opposing Pluto. So there's a lot of stress between those two areas. Here you are expanding and trying to grow in this self-worth area. Mm-hmm. And you've got to contend with the power dynamic of what other people are bringing to the table, or their opinions, or whatever that is. So there's some heat there. And then the Mars and Jupiter are expanding this area of your community.
Yeah.
So the heat is really being highlighted through your community, the community of people that support you, where you receive support and love from others.
Yeah, and that's a really perfect picture in the sense of like, here you are doing, learning to do self-love and really nurture, but you might be like, well, how do I do that? Well, one way is through accepting the love your community has for you.
Perfect.
So when you're out in front of your groups and, whatever it is, maybe it's in your job or maybe whatever is in your life or your group of friends, it could be any of these types of groups, really letting them, their love for you hold you up, because that helps kind of you see how to do that for yourself. And it's kind of a back and forth two-way street. And then I think the Pluto in the 8th house, this is the demands that are put on you through other people's values. And again, this whole scenario could be playing out in your workplace. I mean, this could be where, the values of your bosses or your colleagues are putting pressure on you. Or if it's not within that context, it's other people's stuff that's kind of coming at you. And you're kind of going, wait, I need to love myself and my community, I need to let my community love me. And here's this intense stuff that I'm having to confront. Right. So
that's so interesting. Okay. Yeah. Pay attention to the second house, your self-worth, your value, how you spend and make and utilize your resources, how other people's values and shared resources are impacting you, and how you receive love from your community. Those are the big areas to really focus on this month.
Yeah.
So, okay, next we are going to move to those of you with Cancer rising. And here, those of you with Cancer rising, the sun is just moving here into your first house. So the sun, the warmth and the light of that sun are right on you. It is really this ability to protect and love yourself here. And this red dot, just to let you know, this red dot is Pluto, where we talked about both the Sun and Mercury opposing Pluto later in the month, and Mars squaring Pluto, and Jupiter doing its little thing up here. So this represents Jupiter, which is going to be doing its retrograde starting next month. But right now it's stationed right here. And what you can see is that the opposition here and the square here, these are the three houses that I think are the most important to really pay attention to this month.
Yeah.
Self, others, intimate partners, business partners, one-on-one equal relationships. That's where the kind of power dynamic struggles are going to be coming from to you. And your work out in the world, your vocation or your career is kind of heating up and feeding both sides of that
Yeah.
struggle.
So this is a prime time to cultivate self-awareness. I mean, that's at the core of this, is to really understand more about yourself, more about what you need to develop, maybe a little bit more about the image you project that other people kind of get smacked with, and maybe you're not super aware of that. So this is a great time to do that, to just be thinking in terms of self-awareness and tuning into like what makes you feel like what, just kind of having an awareness, kind of like I was thinking a little bit like I guess like a spider in the web, like you feel the web shake over there, and you kind of tune in. So there's a real sensitivity with Cancer rising. So that is what it's like. And the power struggle comes from the potentially, as you mentioned, from your partnerships over there with Pluto in the seventh house. But just remember, like, this is a mirror. Like the first seventh house access, it's a mirror. And like you see yourself mirrored in other people, and you similarly mirror other people to them. So just, as you're tuning in, if you feel stuck in a power struggle towards the end of the month, this is a good time just to, take it back and reflect on yourself as well, because it's not, the other person's trying to show you something. And this is, the tension may well be playing out in the workplace. I mean, this might be where you take action from, or it might be, that you're working on a project with a coworker, and this is where, this is the action place. Anytime you see a T square, you do want to look at what is holding. That's what this configuration is. And what's at that steering arm? We have Mars and Jupiter and Aries. So this is take action and expand your workplace in order to contend with this self and other question.
Yeah, and that just also thinking about that 10th house, not just as career, but also your reputation. How are you seen out in the world? What is your kind of role in the outer world? So yeah, just giving that some thought. And if there's an awful lot of tension in these three areas of your life, if you really are listening to this and going, oh yeah, there's so much tension, this struggle between me and a coworker, and or me and a partner, and I spend too much time at work, or whatever it is, always thinking of the opposite position in a T square is a place where you can kind of find a certain amount of relief. And so focusing some on the home and family could be helpful in this time as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
This is, I mean, I would almost think like, think about this time every year as a possibility for a little bit of a retreat. Not a retreat like go away from the world, but a little bit of like, make sure you're checking in with yourself regularly. Yeah.
Absolutely. That Cancer rising. Okay. Let's go on to Leo rising. Shift this. Okay. Now, if you've got Leo rising, the focus this month, the sun is just on the solstice moving into your 12th house. So this is bringing the warmth and the light of the sun into the 12th house. The 12th house, it's a complex house. And if you read a lot, you'll get totally confused, because you'll read all kinds of horrible things about it, and then all kinds of wonderful things as well. But I really think of the 12th house as it's our unconscious. It's what we, one of the things that the old time astrologers, the old books that I grew up reading, talked a lot about, everything that got swept under the rug and you haven't looked at. Well, with the sun moving in there, it's a great time to really look internally, to kind of learn to understand what it is that you need to go underneath that surface and nurture. It's really nurturing the unconscious old storylines is so important at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, like just if you're Leo rising, you've kind of got this sort of gregariousness to your life direction. And there is a suggestion around your emotional content being really hard to get to
Yeah.
because you've Leo rising and your moon is, the moon rules the sign of Cancer. So that means that your moon is kind of in charge of this very intangible part of your life. And so it's really tricky to get to. And so this is a great opportunity to really like nurture yourself through getting outside regularly, maybe like helping somebody in need, like that kind of gets you, that selfless service thing gets you in touch with that. But it's a really good time to get in touch with that hidden emotional content, which is, it's hard for you Leo risings. Like you don't really want to, it's more fun to be the Leo rising than to be in that harder realm. So it's a challenge. And I see you're highlighting the axis.
Right. And just to let people know, before we even talk about that little dot is supposed to be Pluto. And this little line here is the path that Jupiter is going to be taking starting next month of its retrograde path. So Jupiter is kind of right in this spot here, standing stock still.
Nice. Yeah. So I guess, this is also where the new moon and the full moon is going to play out a little later in the month. So we have a lot of focus on this. As we mentioned in the beginning, it's kind of the trade-off between where you need to nurture and where you need to mature. And with Pluto opposing the sun and Mercury towards the end of the month, it's sort of like there's a challenge ahead. There's sort of like something you need to go through. It might appear as an impasse of sorts. And in your case with Leo rising, it has to do with your routines, how you look after your health, those sorts of things. You might, if you're not taking care of your health, it could be something that pops up for you this month. You might get a little shot across the bow. So now is the time to kind of be open to transforming your healthcare stuff into a better place, like getting it more solid and master it better.
Yeah, that's I like how you said that. Another thing I'm thinking about is how, when we were talking about the sun moving into that 12th house, the really paying attention to what's under the surface, what your unconscious motivations are. So when we hit that line, that opposition later in the month to Pluto, could that possibly also show up as, I don't have time to look at these internal things because my day-to-day routines are just taking up all my time. It seems like that struggle itself could be part of it. And then we bring in Jupiter, bringing this heat, and, Mars having been in here, this heat going on, and Mars also squaring Pluto, the heat in our worldview. What is it in our worldview that is kind of complicating this? I've got to go deep and understand myself, but my routines won't let me. I don't have time.
Right. Yeah. And yet I think Mars and Jupiter here, in Aries is an insistence on taking another look. This little bit of an insistence of your teacher tapping you on the shoulder, because this ninth house is a place you might look for teachers and saying, you just need to restructure a couple things. You have to. And when you do, there's going to be a huge benefit. You're really going to open up your mind. So
that's great. Another thing, just one added piece with the stress between your unconscious and your routines and the kind of heat coming out of this ninth house area of your worldview. One way to ease the stress is to kind of bring a little focus down here. Talk to those teachers, bring up some of this, talk about this stuff. I would say that's a really important piece to help you move through it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
I can't think of anything else. So yeah.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. Now we are going to move on to those of you with Virgo rising. Now, let's see. Those of you who have Virgo rising, the Cancer sun is moving into your 11th house, and there's a great deal of focus just moving into community, the community that supports you, how you receive love from others. This is the area that you really need to be nurtured here.
Yes.
Okay. And then what's this? Whoa, I did not mean to do that, did I?
Like that.
Why am I drawing a line here, Jenny? And what the heck is that red dot?
The red dot is Pluto. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but towards the end of the month, you're going to receive, I think it's some sort of a challenge from Pluto because it's going to be directly opposite Sun and Mercury. So who you are and how you think, bumping up against something that's presenting a challenge to you. And as you're mentioning with community here, like your job here with Virgo rising is to accept the love of your community, allow yourself to be nurtured and propped up by your community. And that's kind of coming into play with Pluto, like at the end. The thing is about love is it's a flow. I think that's why Cancer, the sign of Cancer somewhat talks about this loving sensitivity because it's a water sign. And so in the 5th house, it's like, where do you give love? You're receiving love from your 11th house, and then the free flow of love out. So that's kind of what some of the context is, I think, on the other end of that.
Right. And the other thing with that, that polarity between the 5th and the 11th house this month is that's where the full moon is going to be. So right. There's a lot of focus on this polarity between these two. There's a lot of stress here. Now, this blue little thing here, this is kind of the path of Jupiter when it's retrograde next month, but right now it's just stationed right here. The Mars is in this area as well and is going to be squaring Pluto. So these are the 3 houses that I think we really most need to pay attention to. If we've got Virgo rising, we've got to look at a certain amount of stress that's going to be happening here between these two, some sort of a power struggle coming from how we want to give of ourselves and how we expect to receive. There may be just a real struggle there. I am giving love in this way and I'm not receiving it the way I think I should be receiving it. That could be a part of that struggle. And then the other people's values are what's heating up this complication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. The 8th house, the Jupiter here stationed, it's like sitting there. It's creating all this heat in that area of other people's belief systems.
Yeah. Huh. This is when you're bumping up against other people's stuff and it feels like, it's kind of stressful. I think in a lot of ways, the 11th, the 5th, and the 8th in this configuration, a lot of ways we are talking about love and we're talking about personal power in a lot of ways. And that's the 8th house is such a kind of mysterious house. It's like all the stuff that's just underneath the surface of people, that isn't so easy to talk about, isn't so easy to see. And in this case, I really do think of it as like an irritant right beneath the skin, like the Aries, like the heat, like, and it really is having to kind of turn and face it, confront it. And that's what the Aries stuff is, right? Like, how do you courageously face these things? Even if you're scared, is how do you confront what these other things are that you're dealing with
so when you ask that question, how do you confront, that's perfect. How do you confront other people's values in order for you to feel like you're giving and receiving in equal measure? How do you do that? Well, anytime there's a T-square, you want to look to the opposite house. So you want to really get clear about your own values.
Yeah.
Stop worrying so much or being so angry about somebody else's values.
Yeah, that's great, Laurie, because that's exactly the idea, is that with that 8th house, you're just needing to draw some boundaries. And the only way you can really draw boundaries is to understand where you end, and the other person begins, and stand confidently in that space. And then you can approach the other person or people with a bit more kindness, which is what ultimately that Cancer sun and Cancer season is wanting you to do. is
Right.
how do you find that kind of more nurturing, loving sensitivity part of you and not be intimidated by other people's stuff, but and not be afraid to provide loving sensitivity. You don't, it doesn't have to be, you know,
Right.
anger or you know, confrontation in a negative sense.
Right.
But
Well, yeah, you're bringing your focus down here. We've got Libra here. So we're
yeah,
bringing some of that diplomacy back to this angry conversation that part of us is all ready to go to battle with.
yeah,
Huh, that's great. Um, okay, you ready to go
right,
on?
yeah,
Okay, so we're going to go from that to those of you who have Libra rising. So if you've got Libra rising in your chart, we're going to take note of the fact that the sun has just moved into your 10th house. So what you're doing, what this is doing is just bringing the light and warmth of the sun to your career, your reputation, your outermost expression of who you are.
mhm,
So that's where the main focus of the month is.
yeah, yes,
And the next thing we want to think about, let me just explain that little red dot, is Pluto. And at the end of the month, we talked about, in the beginning of the video, we talked about Mercury and the sun opposing Pluto. So, and also the full moon will be in that polarity of houses. So the 10th house is career, reputation, your outer world. The 4th house is home. So
mhm.
how do you see that combination?
Well, I think first of all, let's just start with the Cancer in the 10th house. This is a caretaking type of focus brought to whatever your profession is. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the profession is, it has the tone of there's going to be a nurturing and protective component, like a matriarchal type of component. Some of you, I can think of a couple folks I know, Libra rising, and one of them's a nurse, you know, so
Yeah.
that's a very obvious version of it. But your job here is just to recognize the kind of
Mm,
the nurturing and vulnerability components of you know, how you show up socially, like your social reputation, also your workplace, your vocation, as we've mentioned. So I mean, there's and this, we don't like to think about vulnerability in our workplaces, I don't think,
mm,
but it's absolutely necessary. I mean, we're all human beings working together for common things in your workplace, so that is something you need to bear in mind, and that later in that month you may
oof,
well have a challenge put
yeah.
to that in the form of Pluto. So that's just, it could be a power struggle between your home and your workplace.
Yeah.
But with the whole new moon, full moon thing, we're really thinking about, you know, where do you need to kind of mature? Like, how do you need to take care of yourself in your workplace so that you can truly come home and be that mature adult who is in full integrity? I mean, that's sort of what we're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. And with that opposition later in the month, there is going to be a bit of a power struggle. Like
Mhm.
you said, between home and family. It might be or between home and career. It might be a family member or some need that goes on within your home or family that kind of puts you in feeling a power dynamic between that area and your career. And then this blue thing here, this is intended to be Jupiter's path once it goes retrograde. But bottom line, Jupiter is stationed here. There's a lot of heat being developed in this area, 7th house, your relationship. And because of the square pattern that sets up between Mars and Pluto and this opposition, this is really the challenging dynamic of the month, is that power dynamic between home and career, and some relationship is in the mix. Some relationship is um, heating up and forcing you to really work with that dynamic.
Yeah. And it might be the place, like the 7th house here, the partnership, that might be the place where the action actually happens, because Aries is a very action oriented sign.
Right,
I mean, this might be where,
right.
you know, you really have to have that conversation with your partner, if you're looking at an at-home and a work situation. It can also be, it can always be any other type of partner too. It can even be that therapist when you're sitting in therapy for a
Right.
couple of hours, you know, so just bearing that in mind, that's where the action appears to be happening.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, it could be a work related relationship. You know, there's some struggle anyway between relationship, between career and home. And whenever you see that kind of a pattern, a T-square pattern, it's always worth asking yourself, okay, what do I do? What do I do to kind of soothe this and figure out how to
Yeah.
work with that? And it's always good to look at the opposite house and do a little bit of focus there. And that is the first house, the self, really being uh, more balanced in your own personality. Kind of, yeah, taking the heat off
Yeah.
and focusing a little bit more, you know, okay, we've got all this stuff in career, we've got all this stuff at home, and my partner needs all these things. But what about me? What about me? What do I need to
Yeah. Oh,
keep
that's
myself stable and
yeah.
balanced? And
Nice.
there's an important place to focus.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's great. That's really well said, Lori. And I think what we're looking at here in astrology is angular houses. I mean, these are, you know, the first, the fourth, the
Yeah.
seventh, and the 10th. These are the most powerful dynamic houses, the ones where you're going to see the most instantaneous impact. You know, and these are our basics, right?
Yeah.
Where we work, who our family is,
Right.
who's our partner, you know, where do I fit in the mix? I mean, these are kind of fundamental questions. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, that's a big one when you've got a cardinal sign on the ascendant.
Mhm.
Okay, now we're going to make all those lines go away, and we're going to move on to those of you who have Scorpio rising. Now, with Scorpio rising, this is going to bring the warmth and the sun, the warmth and the light of the sun into your ninth house. So the ninth house is really, it's about your worldview. It's, you know, you can think of it as education, travel, cultural identities. You know, it's really whatever expands our understanding of the world. So bottom line, this is worldview, and this is the basic area where Cancer season is really bringing your attention.
Yeah, sure is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that do you want to talk about Pluto?
We certainly can. That this
Yeah.
little red dot here represents Pluto. So
Yeah.
there's later in the month, as we talked about in the early part of the video, both the Sun and Mercury are going to oppose that Pluto. Mars is over here along with Jupiter, so we're going to think about that as well. But this polarity here
Mhm.
is really important to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I mean, this is where we get plenty of time to get tuned into this area of life, right?
Right.
So, but I was thinking like with the ninth house too, there's kind of this sort of a juxtaposition here with Scorpio rising, where the ninth house is your worldview and the big, you know, your big things about open-mindedness. But ironically, it's like going within and working with your own vulnerabilities, which with
Mm,
Scorpio rising, it's intense.
mhm,
Is going to provide you with a huge source of wisdom. And so as
mm.
you confront these challenges within, it's actually going to just, you know, widen your world, but also the people around you are really going to notice that. So I mean, there's a whole universe inside each of us, and I think we tend to not tune into that as much in our society. So with your particular
Yeah.
setup, there's a lot there, you know. And then the challenge comes across later in the month with that sort of, there's potential for a power dynamic from the third house. I mean, this could be just simply an obstacle in your immediate environment that kind of blocks you from, I mean, that's like when the car breaks down so you can't drive to go, you know, to take your school lessons that you're supposed to do, you know. It's like, I mean, it's that kind of thing, something from
Yeah.
the outside environment getting in your way.
It could also, I was thinking about it in terms of, you know, thinking about that third house. Yeah, it's immediate environment. It's also communication. And I'm thinking about the power dynamic could really involve your deepening understanding of your worldview, but you feel this huge conflict in actually speaking up about it.
Yeah.
This conflict, like, oh, just because I believe this, do I really have to say it out loud? And
Yeah.
that really could be the conflict here, or the power dynamic could be actually quite internal, or it could be, someone you're having a conversation with that is pushing you to actually speak your truth, and you're a little sensitive to that because you have Cancer up here and you're vulnerable in that.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's
Um,
great, Laurie. Yeah, it's a really great way to put it.
yeah, and then the other piece that plays into that is that Jupiter standing so still there, really, and Mars being there squaring Pluto at some point that we talked about also. Um, so this sixth house, the day-to-day routines are also in this dynamic.
Hmm. Yeah.
How do you see that? The
I
heat
just
in the sixth house.
I just really see this as like it's so important. We've just had quite a bit of Aries, emphasis here over the course of the last couple months, and this is just pertains to number one, your health. Like check in with your health with this Scorpio rising. Are you doing the things you need to do to
Yeah.
release the stress and burn off frustration
Right.
into
Perfect.
routines? Like if
Hmm.
you're not, if you feel the struggle about not speaking your mind,
Oh,
that can really play negatively into your health. I mean, the way that you speak
right.
is a huge release of
Right.
stress, and it's important, like as you take your personal power, that you're able to do that. And so I think that's how
Wow.
it's connected from my point of view. That's the first thing to think about. You're not as concerned about your health. It's not so much an issue. It's more just, are you eating properly? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you hydrating? With all that Aries, you're burning out your water basically. So this is a time to just tune into those, quite honestly, very simple routines about how you take care of yourself. And that's going to help you relax into, okay, I'm doing this work around my vulnerability. I need to mature and step up in the way that I speak. And that's maybe scary and stressful. So rely on those routines,
Oh,
rely
that's
on
great.
those things to help
Yeah.
you. That's what comes to my mind. What about you?
Yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting. And I also um, am just thinking with Aries there in the sixth house, the routines are, you know, not sitting on a meditation cushion
No.
so much as going out for a mountain bike ride down a mountain. Your routines are going to have to be active, very, very
Yeah.
active. So
Mhm.
when you think about the stress between your worldview, your ability to speak, and then how you're utilizing those day-to-day actions, I want you to also, whenever you see a T square like this, think about what's exactly opposite that point in the T square, because
Mhm.
that's where you can release a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So, releasing the energy into kind of exploring your unconscious here.
Mhm.
It's really about exploring your unconscious, thinking about this as the area that really pertains to your physical health. And this is the area that pertains to your mental health. So maybe it really is time to sit on the meditation cushion after you've done your mountain biking.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's something in this exploring the inner dynamics that can settle and help this
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a good way. You're making me think about how yoga is initially developed for the mind, and it wasn't until it was brought over from the East into the
Uh-huh.
Western society where it became more about the body. Though some of the Ashtanga yoga in India was developed for teenage boys to burn off their
Oh,
energy so they could meditate. The purpose was for meditation, not
huh.
to do exercises with your body. The purpose is to settle the mind enough so that it can handle the meditation. So it is kind of like that. It's like you do your heated practice if that's what you're doing, and that's what enables you to have the meditation practice at the end. And this is how it's kind of like, this is what you do for the greater good. All these things you're doing to speak up, to nurture yourself, to do your routines for your health. Ultimately, it's all for the greater good of the collective. And that's kind of what this is a statement of. So, yeah.
I like that. I like that. So go do something physically crazy active and then settle yourself down and look inside.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. think that's great. Okay. So now if you have Sagittarius rising, we are going to look and find that the sun is moving into your 8th house, bringing the heat and warmth of that sun into the area. The 8th house is really about where we grapple with other people's values, other people's beliefs that are unlike our own. It's where we try to share resources, share values, share belief systems. So it's that process of grappling with things that are very different about other people in order to share.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is what we're really looking at this month.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about that specifically? What do you want to say?
About the Cancer in the 8th
Yeah.
house there. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting the Sagittarius rising. I mean, I think that this suggests with Cancer in the 8th house that you do potentially have some real vulnerable, wounded places that might come up against other people's stuff.
Yeah.
So the really important thing is, and what you can focus on this month, is what do you need to kind of work with your own emotional wounds? Because when you do that, then you can navigate these boundaries with other people's stuff, because you're not commingling your wounds with everybody else's. Like, you're more clear about, hey, this is my stuff, and I need to kind of, do my loving nurturing to myself here. And the purpose is that then you're not so triggered by other people. And it ultimately, that is incredibly empowering. I mean, that's what I'm thinking about.
I think that's really, really a good point, that with Cancer in that 8th house, those of you with Sagittarius rising, it's easy when you're young, obviously these things we do learn over the course of time, but especially when you're young, it's really easy for people to push your buttons.
Yeah.
By their beliefs and their values. And it's just easy to have your buttons pushed there. So this little red spot here is supposed to be Pluto. So there is through the course of this month, first of all, the full moon will be in these 2 houses, but also toward the end of the month, that opposition between the sun and Mercury to Pluto brings in the idea that there's a lot of stress between the 8th house and the 2nd house. And the polarities of houses are so important to understand. This house, as we've been talking about, the 8th house, about other people's values, other people's belief systems. The 7th house, the 2nd house, is about your own personal values, your beliefs, your money, your resources, how you navigate those things for yourself. There's a lot of stress between these 2 areas this month.
Yeah, and I think with Sagittarius rising, what that means is you have part of the direction of your life is about exploring and being philosophical and so on. And I think what this month for you is about, this Cancer season, is as you work through the Cancer stuff, the more difficult, challenging, emotional content, it's kind of like you're going to get this like test right at the end of the month, like, hey, how'd you do? Because the sun's going to oppose Pluto. So you're going to have this test around, how did I do with taking care of myself, offering myself self-love, so that I can navigate these challenging things. When somebody comes in my face and tries to push my buttons, if I've done my work well, I got it. I feel transformed, and I feel empowered. If I haven't got it, you feel explosive, because that's what Pluto does, and more destructive. So it's just, it really is like a little game for you Sagittarians. I know you love games. Sagittarius rising, and that might be a way for you to think about it.
Yeah. That's fascinating to think about that. Yeah, the power dynamic in this situation is coming from yourself.
Yeah.
The with Pluto in the 2nd, the power dynamic is so much between your own values and how you're navigating other people's values.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's between you and other people necessarily, but it's between your own values and how you're navigating those other people's values. It's how you're allowing your buttons to be pushed.
Yeah, like your unhealed area gives
Right.
other people control over you if you haven't worked to heal
Right.
them. So that's what we're looking at.
Right. If
Yeah.
you totally go into a vulnerable, hurt little child place every time somebody pushes your buttons, you know, you've got some work to do. And this really is a powerful incentive to do that. The other thing, this blue line, I'm not even going to try to, this spot here is
Perfect,
where,
Laurie.
this spot here is where Jupiter is. Jupiter is standing still here in Aries. At some point during the month, which we talked about earlier, Mars also is squaring Pluto from Aries, and Jupiter is stopped here. So essentially what's happening here this month is this T-square between these three houses. So we can see that the stress is between our values and how we're navigating other people's values. And there's also a piece here where we're really have a lot of heat building up, kind of feeding that challenge from the area of our own creativity, how we're wanting to take action or move forward in creativity.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like having to deal with that kind of the things we've talked about, the sensitivity, the healing of the wounds, these really intense subjects. And it's kind of like saying, but guess what? Like take action in a way that's fun and generous and giving of yourself and
Giving, yeah.
expressing
Yes.
of yourself. Like, so it's kind of like you're dealing with a serious subject matter. So great time to go out and, you know, do something maybe sort of daredevilish, take a risk, you know, or play with more playful people, which is usually children. You know, I mean, that's kind of where a place to take action. And also, maybe it's going to be a team sport, because one of the ways we want to resolve T-squares, I knew Laurie's going to draw, that's great, is that you may want to look to the other area of life, which in this case is community. So it's almost like go out and have fun with your community in order to kind of give yourself a little break because you're working with this difficult emotional content.
Right. And I think, you know, one of the things with the empty space on this T-square being the 11th house, thinking about that as when you're in that community, really being aware that that's where you're receiving. You know, this 5th house is where we give of ourselves. The 11th house is where we receive from others. So I think a part of this is really allowing yourself to receive love from a community, and that will help calm down the heat of giving too much of yourself or giving of yourself when it's not even asked of you. You know, I'm just thinking that Aries in that 5th house, and the stress between your values and your ability to navigate others. You need to get out there, get amongst your community, and allow yourself to feel supported by others.
Nice.
I think that's important.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Thank you, all of you with Sagittarius rising. And let's move on to, oh, wait a minute. I got to make those lines go away.
Nice.
All right. Now, if you have Capricorn rising, the place we're going to look is that the sun has moved. At the solstice, the sun moves into your 7th house. So when the sun moves into a new area, it brings its light and warmth. So this is the 7th house, is your one-on-one kind of equal partnerships. A lot of people tend to think of the 7th house as it's my spouse. Well, it might be, and that's certainly part of what the 7th house is about, but it's really any important one-on-one partnership. It can be a business partner, it can be your therapist, your astrologer. It's, you know, it's equal kind of partnerships.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of your attention is this month.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to add a little more to all the things you've already said, Lori, just I mean, this is if you have Capricorn rising, you have a vulnerability around partnerships, and you may be a person where it's taken you a while to find that relationship that you do feel enough safety and security with, and to move forward. I mean, this is something that you may be working with lifelong. I mean, sometimes with Capricorn, it's that whole, you're old when you're young and young when you're old. There's a little bit of that kind of interplay. And it might be that you just haven't been available to really kind of go there and be fully vulnerable in any of your partnerships. Again, it doesn't matter which one it is, your therapist, your spouse, your business partner. So there's something about that. And this is a perfect opportunity for you to delve a bit more into that and kind of establish some of your own inner security, and working with your own kind of struggles and wounding here. That's just going to help you so much in your partnerships when you've done some of that work on your own and you have that support for yourself. So
yeah, and there's a lot of focus on partnership this month, a lot of focus on partnership. And then this red dot here, let me just explain, this is supposed to be Pluto. At any rate, the opposition here between these two houses, at the end of the month, as we talked about earlier in the video, the Sun and Mercury are going to be opposing that Pluto. And that's one of the key stresses of this month. So there is a stress between yourself and your partner, or yourself and your understanding of what partnership means. So the power dynamic is going to be between you and, it may show up like a battle with you and your partner, but really it's not, because this is your chart. This is happening in your chart. The power dynamic, the struggle is between you and who you are in partnership.
Yeah, you got it. And that's
okay. Yeah, that's really important to understand. If toward the end of the month, when those oppositions are going on, you suddenly find yourself in a big fight with your partner, really just spend some time alone getting clear about your own process of how you are and who you are in partnership.
Yeah, because it's hard to, I mean, it's hard to look at yourself sometimes. And I think with Pluto and Capricorn in your first house, there's been a massive transformation about how you interface with the world since 2008. I mean, you've been doing a lot of work. And on the small level, this is just being highlighted this month as it's a little bit of how did you do? How have you worked at that integrity for all this time of self and being really in integrity with yourself? I mean, that's the question. Because that is what allows you to be more vulnerable in relationships, which if you can't be vulnerable in your most important relationships, they're not as intimate as they could be, and you are really missing out. So it's important work. It's valuable work.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It just opens up all this stuff. I would bring us down quite a rabbit hole just about the importance of Capricorn allowing someone else in.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things for Capricorn, I think, whether it's rising sign, sun, moon, whatever, is just, Capricorn's tendency to build walls to protect itself and, allowing in that vulnerability. And this is a very important time to be thinking about that. Now, the other thing to think about, I'm not even going to try to explain what that was supposed to be. But we have in this fourth house for you with Capricorn rising is where Jupiter is basically standing still at 8 degrees Aries. Mars at some point in the month squares Pluto. And so this comes into play as an important piece in the conversation. The stress here, the stress between self and partnership, is really playing out in the home life, the fourth house. So this is where a lot of how it's playing out is in the home, where you have Aries in here and Jupiter is expanding this heat in that area of the fourth house. So that's really a dynamic little conversation here for those of you with Capricorn rising.
Yeah.
Before we talk about where to go with it, what else do you have to say about it?
Oh, sorry.
Mm.
I was thinking how this might be playing out. I mean, this could even be like you have some stress with your partner, and part of that stress is one of your relationships with the parents. You know, like maybe one of your parents doesn't like your partner,
Huh.
or maybe they're siding with that partner. I mean, that could be one way that it's increasing heat in the stress that you feel. It's an outside kind of
Yeah.
influence that's increasing the heat on you a little bit.
Right.
So that just something to think about. Like there's something, it's whatever it is, it's something that potentially is aggravating the
Yeah.
stress you feel, but also ironically, and as these things are, is part of the key to how to break out of that
Right.
stress, right?
Yeah, and another few real simple idea. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
your family might not like your partner. Your partner might not like your family. You know, there's something there. There's also might be, oh my God, we realize we just had our third child and we need a bigger house, but we can't afford it. You know,
Yeah.
so there's something in that area of home
Mhm.
that is contributing to the stress here. So, how do we work with that? Well, we move to the opposite from that, which is essentially a T square formed here. We move up here. So, go to work.
Yeah.
For those with Capricorn rising, that's kind of hard to say because you tend to be a bit of a workaholic probably anyway. But there's some way that you can kind of let that stress reduce in the
Yeah.
outer world.
Yeah. And I mean, you're looking to a place that has Libra, that's equanimity. So this is how do you like settle your mind? How do you let your mind get a more, put it somewhere else, put the focus somewhere else so that you can let, because some of these things can settle without you being there to add even more aggravation. And if you give it space, which is also part of an air sign, it could really help. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can actually, I mean, if you think about it, you can allow that equanimity and balance in the workplace. Yeah, just bring that home.
Yeah.
Go to work, develop that within you, and then you can bring it home and it can help support that challenge. Okay.
Nice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now we're going to go to those of you with Aquarius rising. So for you, the sun moving into Cancer is going to bring the sun right here into your sixth house, where the main focus for the month is going to be on this area. The sixth house is really, it's our day-to-day routines of how we care for ourselves. You've
Hmm.
got Cancer there. So nurturing and caring for yourself with your day-to-day routines is kind of a natural job that you do.
Hmm.
Hmm,
Yeah. And it's
interesting.
also really important because I mean, Aquarius rising, your
Right.
part of your focus is about being out in the world. It's a yang sign. So you're inventing, and that's kind of the focus you're going. You're moving around the world with that very mental, cerebral focus. And it's very important that you get, I think, solitude in order to take care of that vulnerable space that's represented by Cancer in the sixth house. I mean, it doesn't always have to be solitude, but I definitely feel like, um, meditative outdoor, like I feel like go paddle boarding. That's kind of what I think with this, and be floating on that board in the middle of the pond where you don't have to, you're just you in the sky and the water, and that's kind of what you want. That should be a focal point for you, something like that, lying on the beach, or there's other ways to look at it, but that's essentially the image.
I think of it as hot showers and bubble baths.
Yeah.
You know,
Whatever works for you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, some water is a good element. So it's yeah. I mean, everything you brought up, laying on a beach, paddleboarding, these are all water infused activities, as are hot showers, and
Yeah.
yeah. I guess I wanted to bring in some indoor activities in case I don't know, whatever. Okay, so along with that, the biggest stress of the month, this little red dot is supposed to represent Pluto. Whoa, I did it again. So Pluto is going to be, both the sun and Mercury later in the month will be opposing Pluto. So that really is bringing in this stress between these two areas of your life.
Mhm.
So, thinking about the polarities here, we've talked a lot about the sixth house. It's about how we take care of ourselves, our physical selves. The 12th house is more, it's our unconscious. It's more how we take care of our mental being. So it's
Mhm.
going inward. So there's a struggle, this challenge toward the end of the month, this power dynamic kind of challenge is from something very hidden and internal,
Mhm.
maybe arguing with our need for solitude and that laying on that beach.
Mhm.
Maybe it's it's Capricorn here after all. This could be some internal storyline that you're telling yourself, you don't deserve that hot shower. You don't deserve to lay on the beach.
Yeah.
And yet, so there's a struggle here. There's a power dynamic. Some internal storyline is trying to prevent this nurturing care.
Yeah, I feel like this could play out as something like where you feel blocked off from the collective. You feel like it's just you all by yourself doing you, and nothing could be further from the truth. You
Uh-huh.
are one wave in the ocean of humanity. So it might present as like where you feel cut off and you've forgotten that you're part of this much greater whole, and that you are important to that whole. You are, an important piece of this much larger whole. So I think that that's kind of, because I could see the Cancer in the sixth house. Sometimes I could see that being heavy and maybe depressing, like, or depression, or
Mm,
like where you're dealing with your kind of more wounded self. It can be a lot, and it can
mm,
end up making you feel alone. But the
mm,
reality is, when you go through that 12th house and you're working with that, you find the common humanity in all of these things, and you
mm,
remember that you belong. So I
mm.
think it's something
It's
about that.
beautiful. That I like that.
Mhm.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to think about is, let's ignore this and just know that right here we've got Jupiter standing still, and this Pluto squares Mars in that place, and Jupiter is standing still here. So in essence, we've got a bit of a T square being formed here, with a lot of heat being built up here in the third house. So thinking about it as this struggle, this stress between your routines and your internal work, that struggle is really kind of being fed by this heated conversation.
Yeah, or you need to talk about this harder
Yeah,
stuff, because these things are kind of
yeah,
intangible. What we're talking about with your Aquarius
right.
rising, and like, but everybody has these experiences, so it's kind of like you have to be brave and talk, and whether that's your because it's a therapeutic context, or it's just a friend, or even a neighbor, or somebody you don't know, and you'd be amazed at how many people have a similar experience. So it's like being brave to just go ahead and
Right.
say it. I mean, maybe
Right.
you're,
Go
you
ahead and
know,
say it. And
yeah.
even if it creates a problem, that problem is part of the dynamic of working out of it.
Yeah.
Because really, yeah, this is a very heated area, and it does, the Mars there is squaring Pluto. So it's not like speaking up is going to solve the problem, but speaking up is part of the path to solve the problem. And one
Right.
of the ways to really work with it is to get very clear before you open your mouth, whenever there's a T square, the real solution or a real way of kind of getting getting clarity or resolving it is to go to the opposite point from the T. So this is the ninth house. So before you open your mouth, you want to get really clear about your worldview and
Yeah,
what
because
it is you're speaking of.
yeah, that's a really good point, Laura, too, because I think one thing we forget is, when you talk about stuff, you do add weight to them. And on one hand, you need to talk about your issues and share your experience, but on the other hand, you also can build up a big story about something, and that's not serving your purposes. So I think
Right,
that that's the kind of thing to think
right.
about, is like, are you speaking inflammatory language to kind of be incendiary and throw a bomb into the mix?
Oh,
Or are you,
perfect.
Yeah. Or are you speaking because you need to share your experience and you want to empower other people with your courage? I mean, it's kind of that, like, which thing are you doing? And that whole arrow you've drawn beautifully up to the ninth house, if you're using it the right way, you're adding to the collective worldview, like the open-mindedness that's possible, like helping other people open their minds and, step into
Right.
that balanced space.
Right. And if before you throw that bomb in the conversation, you really take consideration of your worldview and you don't want to throw a bomb. There's Libra, your worldview is much more peacefully oriented, and
Yeah.
throwing a bomb is not going to serve that. So whatever you do, this conversation is in service of that.
Yeah.
Huh, that's lovely. That's
Great.
great. Okay, so we are going to move on now to those of you who have Pisces rising.
Wow.
So for those of you with Pisces rising, last but not least, Cancer, the sun moving into Cancer has brought the sun into your fifth house. So when the sun moves into a new house, what does it do? It brings its warmth, it brings its light into that area. So this is Cancer season. A bunch of the planets will be playing around in there. That's where the attention is. The fifth house, I think of the fifth house first and foremost of the area of our lives where we give most authentically of ourselves. The old time astrologers would talk about the fifth house as the house of children, love affairs, and creativity. It's where we give of ourselves unconditionally. So this is a big focus of this period of time for you.
Yeah, and I think this is a really great time for Pisces rising to think about nourishing yourself through getting enough playtime, like to getting enough like play and creative time. And because the reality is, the more you're nourished, and this is Cancer, so it carries the archetype of the mother, the more you're going to be able to nourish your children. Or if you don't have children, it's anything that you're giving birth to, your creative projects, the way that you do that. So it's pretty simple. Like, you've got to fill your cup in order to be in that playful space. And if you are a parent, it's a good thing to think about especially of younger children, of finding ways. And I know it's hard for people to fill your own cup so that you can actually do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. And the next thing I want to look at, this little red dot is supposed to represent Pluto. And at toward the end of the month, we talked about in the early part of the video about Mercury and the sun opposing that Pluto, and that really being a big area of stress this month. So this is also the two houses that will be involved in the full moon. So this is an important polarity between the fifth and the 11th house. This particular polarity is one of my favorites. I don't know why. I get very excited about this polarity. But this, really understanding that the fifth house is where we give of ourselves, and the 11th house where we receive from others. People talk about the 11th house as community. It's not the community that you are giving to as much as it's the community that's supporting you. I remember in early books I read, they would talk about the 11th house as the house of your hopes and dreams. But it's the people that you bring to you to support you to those, your goals, and not your close friends. It's more like-minded people.
Yeah, your allies.
It's your allies, the like-minded others. So there's a stress here in your life this month, and especially toward the end of the month, being a power dynamic in that area. So what would that power dynamic look like? What do you think, Jen?
Well, I was kind of thinking, I mean, it's interesting how it's that whole self versus community. Like, are you doing things that are different with your children, let's say, that are different from how all your other people in your community are raising their children? Is there some way in which you've changed that? I was thinking with, you've had Pluto in this 11th house for many years now. So that really suggests there's been a big shift in your community, for you personally, who your community is in the last many years, over a decade now. So I do think that this is kind of that, I don't know, there's some sort of check around, like there might be a shift in your community. Like, does your community line up with your values in terms of how you want to give unconditional love? And it may not. So, I mean, this is kind of something you might bump up against. If you're really nurturing those places inside yourself that, where you're nurturing your wounded inner child, which is a true thing. But if you're doing that in that 5th house and you're doing it well, then when you come up against whatever this conflict is with your community, I think you're going to have an easier time of it. You're either going to be able to stay with yourself and stand in integrity with yourself, and leave that community, or you're going to reaffirm that these people are indeed who you need them to be in for the way they hold you up.
This is so interesting because it's just bringing personally to mind a few people I know with a Pisces rising that, I can just see what's coming for them in terms of the power dynamic from community. They thought they had a community, and then, some of the changes in our culture have really put them at odds with the community.
Yeah.
And it's really painful for people when they have spent years building a supportive community, and then all of a sudden their community goes in a direction that they can't support. That is a devastating thing for people to go through. And I can see, that stress could be really strong for people this month. And then I'm not going to totally explain what I was trying to do with this little mark here, but right here in your 2nd house, those of you with Pisces rising, this is where Jupiter is standing very still right now at 8 degrees of Aries. Jupiter is just standing there holding that space. Mars has very recently was with Jupiter. Mars forms a square to Pluto this month. So in essence, what is happening is there is a T-square formed between that struggle. So we've got the struggle between how we give and how we receive love. And there's a lot of heat that is kind of feeding that struggle coming from our own personal values.
You got it.
This is just bringing me right back to those same people I'm thinking of, as their personal values were so aligned for so long, but their personal values, they're having to grapple with, are these really, am I willing to change my values to stay in this dynamic? I might be getting a little too personal here, but
no, it makes sense.
It's really, really fascinating to think how the heat of understanding our own values can really be feeding this power struggle.
Yeah, and it's like it's your value, like the autonomy of your value. Like, these are my values held, very fiercely, and how that is playing into this dynamic. And again, like anything with astrology, that can play out either way. That can be like, no, I am standing in courage, and these are my values, and I will not change them because they're important. But it also could be that idea of like, I mentioned in a previous one of just kind of chucking a little bit of incendiary something into the mix, like attacking somebody else for their values, and having that play into the stress of this power dynamic.
Or it could, there could also be the courage to allow your values to change.
Yeah, exactly. And it's up to you, each person listening to this with Pisces rising, like how you want to work with this energy, because those are really the choices. And
that's going to be a big theme over the next 6 months or so as Jupiter does its retrograde. At any rate, that's another conversation for another day. But one of the things, you look at this stress, this struggle, this heated up value system, and where do you take it? What do you do to kind of give some relief? You go to the opposite point from the T-square that's created here. And that brings us into the 8th house, which for you holds Libra. So that is you already kind of know how to be a little diplomatic and do a dance with other people's values, right? So you go there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, it's like it's that whole thing where it's like sometimes it's easier to be forgiving and have a view of somebody else. It's not as easy to look at your own thing and be, it's that whole self-love thing. It's not as easy to do that. It's sometimes like, it's not a formula. It's not like you go to school and you learn how to love yourself and then you learn how to love your friends, and it's not in that order. It's something we're doing all the time. And so in this case with Pisces rising, you may have an easier time of watching other people going through their difficult baggage and problems and so on and so forth, and you don't feel the need to judge them necessarily, but maybe you're pretty harsh on yourself. So I mean, that could be that you kind of see yourself in other people's eyes, and think for a second, like, how would my best friend perceive my values? They wouldn't berate me or tell me I was wrong. They would be like, oh, like, how can I help? Like, do you want to talk about it? Can I make you a cup of tea? So it's kind of that sort of sensibility. That's what I think of.
Yeah, I think as you're saying that, it's like, yeah, just figure out how to treat yourself as well as you would treat somebody else.
Yeah.
Because you do know how to fix the cup of tea and sit with your friend and listen to them, even if they're spouting stuff that you absolutely don't believe in. You know how to do that. Can you do that for yourself?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a place to work, with your friend. Bring your friend in, sit down and talk, and give yourself as much kindness as you would to them.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. No problem.
Are we wrapped up? Okay. Thank you, Pisces rising. And we're going to stop sharing. Whew. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Jenny, I bet there's nobody else left listening to us, so we could talk about it.
No, everybody clicked ahead, Laurie. So
I could bring the kitten out and show it to everybody.
Well, hopefully you did listen to this video. If you're still here, thank you for watching and learning, and please comment anything you want to see here in these videos. So thank you.
And contact us for consultations and conversations. And thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, Laurie. Bye.
Bye.